As I mentioned, today's focus is really around improving compliance management efforts and utilizing the right kind of tools in order to do that, finding ways in which products can actually improve your processes, workflows to kind of stay ahead of audit season as it progresses. So as we think about audit compliance, it's really nested within the core continuous intelligence platform for Sumo Logic, which in previous sessions we've kind of covered as a focal point around monitoring, detecting, searching, investigating. And sort of a subset within that is really around audit compliance, which is what we'll talk about today, and really being able to improve your compliance posture and really accelerate through audit season, depending on kind of which specific types of compliance requirements you're looking to tackle and how you're looking to achieve that. So just a quick note on the platform itself. We have over 100,000 active users globally. I believe the latest data is 1.7 exabytes of data that's being analyzed on a daily basis, quadrillions of records analyzed daily as well. We have 2,300 total customers, kind of the active users as a part of that larger customer base. So in some cases, we have hundreds of users within one customer that are utilizing the platform. And just a couple of probably familiar names of customers of ours that are using the platform today, including Visa, Salesforce, Australia Post Alliance, Levi's, etc. So AWS ISV Partner of the Year as well. So just a lot of really strong support kind of across the board from a technical and product perspective. I think a lot of the core compliance challenges that we see from our customers is kind of a lack of cloud support that they see within the platform. Or within a given platform that you may have chosen, or kind of combination of open source tools, et cetera. So I think one of the challenges around that is just it simply doesn't scale to kind of handle these kind of cloud workloads that you may be looking to progress and kind of improve upon and have more resources attached to. So I think that's one consideration. Another piece is definitely slower cycles to compliance readiness, which is a big focus of today's session, is to think about what are kind of some of the really time-consuming aspects of product deployment and tuning as you kind of take into account the requirements around compliance, whether it's PCI or various others. In the demo, we'll primarily focus today on PCI, but I think absolutely take the broader view in the scope of this conversation. We could be speaking about GDPR or PII or SOC 2 Type 2, it could be any number of types of compliance efforts. But I think in any event, it's always going to be helpful to consider how do you actually accelerate through and make sure that you have compliance readiness top of mind, not just kind of when audit season rolls around, but kind of throughout the process. And then we also see a lot of issues around complexity for a lot of our customers where essentially you see complex solutions that really require these steep learning curves, or just cobbling together a combination of many tools or products to kind of build out these kind of more repeatable processes and kind of optimizing around that. But I think it can be a lot better to just sort of select one platform and have more clarity around that. And then finally, Sumo does offer a credits-based, credits-based pricing model, which really allows you, one moment. Sorry, just taking a sip of water there. So because of our credits-based pricing model, you definitely have the option to have more flexibility around how you kind of tackle various use cases. In this case, we're really focused around compliance, but if we go back to the four core solutions, you really have the option to utilize all four and be flexible based on what your kind of requirements are, depending on what you're looking to specifically achieve in terms of which of these is most relevant in any given quarter around a variety of use cases. So Sumo Logic itself is a cloud-native data monitoring solution. We really allow for rapid compliance readiness for both cloud and on-prem. I think today's focal point is really a little bit more on the cloud side, but we'll kind of cover off on both topics. These are examples of some of the kind of really fairly comprehensive as far as what the various data sources are that you would be bringing into the Sumo Logic platform. So that would be inclusive of microservices, applications, servers, workstations, OS data, which we commonly cover within the cloud security monitoring demos, databases, firewalls, IDS, identity and access management. The list goes on, but I think this gives you a little bit of a sense of kind of the types of data sources that can be brought in. I'll primarily be focusing around firewall and network data for today's demo, but this should give you a little bit of a better sense of kind of where things sit. And then just taking a broader view, so I think we covered kind of the data sources. This is a little bit more of a categorization here of saying, okay, what does it look like in terms of the apps or external products that you may be building for your customers versus SaaS IT, which actually is in some ways is not covered just fully within this graphic, because we're really also referring to your Zoom or Zscaler or Okta instances that would be more internal kind of corporate IT usage. Multi-cloud, I think, is fairly self-explanatory. We have a lot of customers that are utilizing AWS in line with Azure or GCP, sometimes all three, just as much as we do have customers that use both, would have both cloud data sources just as much as on-premise data that they want to kind of sift through and include. Then they're ingesting that into the platform, performing security monitoring, utilizing security monitoring capabilities to really surface this critical security issues via the dashboards and alerts that I'll show within the platform. Security analytics really allowing you to go deep and really have use case specific queries that you're analyzing these broader data types with, and then monitoring and analyzing, pivoting out and having really that granularity of device level, IP level, network, and database level. So just a quick note, and I should probably move the screen. Yeah, make sure you can read the title. So protecting customer data with best-in-class security and compliance. So what that really means is we're referring to the compliance of the Sumo Logic platform itself. And what I mean by that is, the list is fairly comprehensive. So PCI, SOC 2 Type 2, ISO 27001 certified, CSA Star certified. So as we kind of progress through this, and I think we have this in bold of FedRamp authorized for moderate impact being one of our more recent successes from a compliance perspective. And one of the real benefits, I think, of the FedRamp consideration is being able to really work much more closely with, with government data and really have the ability to kind of have that check mark that really allows you to feel confident in how you sort of present your work and work more closely with government data or with government customers. So I think that's a really important consideration and one of our bigger recent successes in that department. So cool. So I think we kind of covered, some of the challenges, but kind of in line with that, or how do we actually tackle that? So Sumo itself is built on AWS. We're very much able to scale up according to what our customer needs are, really helping to improve compliance readiness, which we'll run through in the demo, ease of use and flexibility, and cost effective we kind of covered in terms of the overarching credits-based pricing model. And then as we think about how you would tackle PCI compliance, specifically, I think if you're on this call, you're likely to be responsible for PCI compliance requirements, given that this is such a common effort within our customer base. And I think, as you consider all 12 of these, so installation and maintenance of firewall, not using vendor supplied defaults for passwords, protecting stored data, encrypting transmission of cardholder data, protecting all systems against malware, developing, maintaining secure systems and applications. We'll cover kind of some fraction of these as I go down the list, but I want to call out these are the core 12, and we're happy to cover all 12 of these with you. Some of these, are, I would say, even PCI requirement 9, which is restricting physical access to cardholder data, there are absolutely ways in which you could bring in on-premise, on-location data for cardholders in particular from a financial perspective. But it also goes both ways, right? You have to always consider which types of data sources you're bringing in. I know of a lot of financial services companies that we work with that are actually obfuscating or obscuring that data intentionally, and they're masking out all of that cardholder data very intentionally. But there are ways in which you could actually restrict that at the physical level that we could also consider. So basically getting ahead of it and then maybe tracking change to make sure, okay, we want to make sure that we're not seeing any data coming in some cases, and any spike in data would trigger an alert. So just one little edge case to consider from perspective of restricting physical access to cardholder data. So if you're feeling so inclined, you're absolutely free to sign up for a free trial, and you could run through a lot of these examples alongside as I'm kind of running through the demo environment. And so I think one of the first places, or sort of the best places to start, will be, I think today I'll focus around Palo Networks data, but just think of this as broadly applicable for kind of any type of firewall data. And I'll kind of start with requirement one, and I'll say, what does it look like, as I kind of toggle between these? Of here, we're really focused around installation and maintenance of firewall configuration itself. So we're actually able to track and understand what the network traffic behavior is, and understand where allowed traffic over time versus silently dropped traffic over time is kind of in correlation or not. We're seeing quite a bit of spike in activity. So we see a large spike at kind of the 9 a.m. mark, as well as the 9:35 a.m. mark, which seems to indicate that there's silently dropped traffic that may need to be considered and may need to have configuration adjustments to actually account for that. And then we also have the allowed network activity by transport and internet layer. So I think this is actually a really helpful approach to consider where we actually break this out and kind of understand better what the fractional differences are, and make sure that everything is in alignment with what we expect. So we see TCP and UDP being responsible for most of the allowed network traffic. Then we see Ether IP, OSP, FIGP, etc. For each of these, I think there's really a lot, to consider in terms of, well, when we see OSP, FIGP, is this really in line with what our current configuration should be? So it's a good kind of gut check as far as whether you expect to see certain type of transport or internet layer protocol data coming into the system. So just being able to have that kind of broader view from a security monitoring perspective, I think can be really helpful for just making sure that you're understanding those compliance management requirements. A little bit different view into requirement one. Here we're looking at traffic direction monitoring specifically. And I think this is very broadly applicable to a lot of the financial level data that we're looking at. So maybe requirement 4 and 9 would also come into play here, of encrypting transmission of cardholder data as well as restricting physical access to cardholder data. And here we're seeing outbound network activity, sending of outbounds versus receiving of inbound, and which of those IPs are actually these are coordinated with. So internal sort of corporate IT teams would have a pretty good sense of which IPs should be able to accept or send this traffic via Palo Networks. This should align back with what the current configuration is. A lot of compliance considerations come into play here, especially around requirement one of installation and maintenance of firewall configuration specifically, right? So here we're considering that we see source host alignment with 10.130.2.49 aligned with 4.2.1 49. And I think for this, we may want to consider, okay, well, based on that instance level and event count, et cetera, and the higher spiking that we're seeing within this source host, do we expect that to occur? Or maybe we don't expect any event count to be occurring. Here we see just 2 or 1, but in some cases, even just anything over 0 may be a red flag, right? So I think just having that really close eye on firewall configuration can be really, really helpful from that perspective. Kind of moving beyond requirement 1 into requirement 2 as well. Here we're looking at not using vendor supplied defaults for passwords and other security parameters. So here we're looking at traffic by application over time. And I think this really gives us a little bit better sense of what kind of the access controls are that are set up, broken out by various types of applications. We see Active Directory sort of pops up on the list, sort of top, fairly high up the list as well. So I think as we consider Active Directory, we want to understand better how many instances and how commonly that's actually occurring. And then that can help to inform whether or not we need to make adjustments as to what the actual permissions levels are, whether Active Directory should have that access to these types of resources, and then kind of building around that and really being able to actually tune even down to the IP level and actually set up your filters accordingly to say, okay, In this particular case, maybe I'm more interested, like I mentioned, we can even just key in on just Active Directory. And within the last 15 minutes, we see kind of these, we can call them spikes because it's a small amount of data, but we do see something above 0 clearly. And in this case, where it could be as simple as just saying, well, the destination IP is only ever coming in through 10.130.2.120, which is something that we trust, or maybe even considering possible, horizontal port scan attacks, where in this case, we're actually flagging destination port 1025 as having kind of this unique destination host count of 1. So then we may need to actually drill down as a security analyst or engineer and consider better why we're seeing this potential horizontal or vertical port scan attack, and how do we actually navigate through that, especially given the sensitivity of Active Directory data in particular. So we can back out again and say, okay, well, based on what we're seeing here, we do see a large number of occurrences for DNS or incomplete too, which this may be a configuration adjustment that is also required, because we're saying, okay, in this case, it's of concern that we don't see complete application data coming in. We want to better understand that data. We don't want to have any unknown unknowns within our security monitoring platform. So we always want to have that deeper understanding from that perspective. And then kind of moving ahead so requirement 2 we kind of covered, but requirement 4 here, we're looking at encryption of transmission of cardholder data in particular. So we can actually see the insecure allowed traffic broken down by protocol, which should look familiar, as well as insecure denied traffic, which probably is even of more concern. But because it's over TCP or UDP, there are probably fewer red flags to consider here. But I think for network activity and unencrypted default ports, this is where it gets interesting, right? Because we're actually seeing port 80 and 8080. We'd expect that to be, given that they're public ports, we do expect some degree of unencrypted probably traffic to occur, or it may be that it's encrypted at a different level at a different point in time, and that this sort of part of the actual network traffic, process or pipeline does not require encryption for whatever the reason may be, based on what your PCI requirements are. But I think, other ports may be of more consideration, where we just never expect to see unencrypted traffic, or maybe we didn't expect to see any traffic at all, right? So I think all of these things kind of come into play as we consider the broader aspects of what may be occurring within the system, and how we kind of think about encryption of that traffic, and how do we actually tackle that. So with that, I just want to give you a quick sense of the platform itself, and kind of some of the offerings within that, from a compliance perspective. So hopefully this is a helpful kind of overview. Feel free to sign up for the free trial as you kind of dig in and better understand the platform itself. My name is Jason Dunne. I'm a product marketing manager here at Sumo Logic. More than happy to answer any questions that you have. So I'll just kind of go on mute for the last couple minutes of today's live demo session. If you do have questions, just pop them into the Q&A, and then I can make sure that I cover them either through the demo, or I can just kind of talk through a typical solution that we would approach for that, based on what the challenges that you're looking to address. So thanks so much for joining today's session. As I said, I'll kind of stay on mute here for the last couple minutes of today's session in case there are any questions. And if not, signing off here, and thanks so much for joining.